My husband filed for divorce, demanding everything but our son. Everyone called me insane for not fighting back. I just smiled and signed. He had no idea what was buried on page 47 until his own lawyer saw it. You can keep the kid. I'm not interested in custody battles. I want you to sit with that sentence the way I had to. Not our son. Not even Tyler, the kid. Like I'd asked him to split a storage unit and he was letting me keep the box of things he didn't want anymore. I'm Diana Saunders. I was an accountant before I was anyone's wife, and I want that fact on the record early because it matters more than anything else I'm about to tell you. 3 weeks ago, I signed away a 6-bedroom house, 2 cars, and a real estate company worth, on paper, to anyone who didn't look closely, around $3.5 million. My lawyer, a woman named Margaret Collins, who has spent 19 years making Houston's most confident men very quiet in courtrooms, begged me to fight for half. I told her okay instead. Just okay. Give him what he wants. She thought I'd lost my mind. My own mother thought I'd lost my mind. I let them think it, because the version of me they needed to see that morning was a woman who'd given up, not a woman who'd spent 3 years building a trap so quiet her own husband walked into it with his eyes open and a grin on his face. Let me back up. 8 years ago, Vincent Saunders and I made a deal, though we never called it that out loud. He handled the money. I handled the house. He built Saunders Premier Realty from a 2-desk office into a company that got him invited to give little speeches at Rotary Club dinners. I kept our home running with the same precision I used to bring to reconciling ledgers at Whitmore and Associates, where I'd worked for 6 years before Tyler was born. I was good at my job. I mean genuinely good. The kind of good where partners ask you to double-check their own math. I gave it up because Vincent said gently, the week Tyler came home from the hospital, he needs his mother home not daycare, not some nanny raising him. It sounded like love. I know now it was closer to a business decision, 1 income stream instead of 2, 1 full-time employee running his household for free. For the first 2 years, he was present. Distracted, but present. Then, somewhere around Tyler's 3rd birthday, something in him just clicked off. He started treating fatherhood the way he treated a stalled listing, something to revisit later, when he had more time. I remember one night specifically, because it's the kind of night that rearranges something permanently in a mother's chest. Tyler was 5. He'd asked Vincent that morning to read him the dinosaur book at bedtime, the big one with the fold-out pages, and Vincent had said, absolutely, buddy, I'll be home by 7. Tyler sat by the front window from 6:45 onward, in his pajamas, the dinosaur book in his lap, watching headlights turn into our driveway, and then not stop. Vincent came home at 11:14 p.m. I remember the time because I was still awake, sitting in the dark kitchen, and I checked the microwave clock the second I heard the garage door. He smelled like a perfume that wasn't mine, something floral and expensive, nothing like the drugstore vanilla spray I kept by our bathroom mirror. He didn't apologize. He didn't even mention Tyler. He just said he'd had a rough one with a client and went straight to bed. I told myself it was nothing. A stressed man, late nights, real estate is a demanding business. Everyone says so. I'd been telling myself some version of that sentence for 2 years by then, and I was getting good at it. Better, honestly, than I was ever willing to admit to myself in the daylight. 3 years ago, I went looking for my passport in the file cabinet in Vincent's home office. We had a trip to Cabo planned that, like most things by then, quietly fell apart, and I opened the wrong drawer. Bank notices. A stack of them, rubber banded together like he'd meant to deal with them eventually, and then just hadn't. 90 days past due. $340,000 owed. My stomach didn't just drop. It went cold and hard, the way it does when a number on a spreadsheet doesn't reconcile, and you already know, before you even trace it back, that someone has been lying to you with the numbers. I kept looking. There was another letter behind it, from a different lender, referencing a second loan. Then a third notice. This one marked final demand in red block letters, for a construction loan against a property I recognized, the flagship office building Vincent had bragged about at a dinner party 8 months earlier, telling everyone it was paid off, an asset, a crown jewel. It wasn't paid off. It was hemorrhaging money. My hands were shaking so badly I nearly tore the first envelope, taking the letter back out to reread it a second time, just to be sure I hadn't misunderstood. I hadn't. 6 years of professional experience reading exactly this kind of document told me precisely what I was looking at. A business drowning, dressed up in a navy suit and a gold Rolex. I photographed every page with my phone, careful to lay each one flat, careful to get the account numbers legible, careful to put every single sheet back in the exact order and the exact drawer I'd found them in. I remember standing there afterward for a full minute, just breathing, before I walked back out to the kitchen and made dinner like nothing in the world had happened. That was the night I stopped being a wife who trusted her husband with the numbers and became, again, an accountant. I just didn't tell anyone yet, including him. 2 months after the drawer, I found the second thing, and this one didn't just scare me. It made me sick, physically, in a way the debt hadn't. I was helping Vincent's assistant, Renee, sort through a box of old files to shred. He trusted me with things like that, the boring administrative debris of his business, because he'd stopped believing I understood any of it. In that box was a loan application, a home equity line against our house for $180,000. My signature was on it. I have signed my name more times than I could count. Mortgage documents, school forms, my old audit work papers. I know exactly what my signature looks like. The specific hitch where the D connects to the I, the small flat loop at the end of the A in Diana. This wasn't it. It was close. Close enough to fool a bank teller glancing at a stack of documents on a Tuesday. Not close enough to fool the woman whose name it was stealing. I found a second one an hour later, buried in the same box. Same forged signature. Different lender. Another $92,000. I sat on the floor of that office with 2 forged loan documents in my lap and did the only thing that made sense to the part of my brain that used to catch other people's fraud for a living? Nothing, immediately. I didn't confront him. I didn't call a lawyer. Forgery is a felony. I knew that from 6 years of compliance training, and reporting it that day with no other context, no full picture, would have blown up a house of cards I didn't yet understand the shape of. I needed to see the whole structure before I pulled a single card, so I did what I'm good at. I waited. I watched. I kept my mouth shut and my eyes open for 3 years, while my husband kept smiling at Rotary Club dinners about an empire that was, by then, quietly worth less than nothing. The perfume kept showing up. Different bottle, same story, over 3 more years, Vincent coming home later and later, a rotating cast of excuses that got lazier as time went on, like he'd stopped believing I was paying close enough attention to bother crafting good lies. Her name, I eventually learned, was Brittany Voss, 27. I found out about her the mundane way. Not a dramatic discovery, just a name that started appearing on Vincent's calendar, shared with our family iCloud account out of pure habit, more times than any single client reasonably should. I saw her once at his office holiday party, carrying a Birkin bag that anyone who'd worked retail for even a summer could tell, at a glance, was not real. Vincent's mother, Eleanor, took to her instantly, the way she never once took to me in 8 years of marriage, draped an arm around her at that same party, called her just delightful, and sent me, her own daughter-in-law of nearly a decade, into the kitchen to help with the appetizers. I stood in that kitchen with a tray of stuffed mushrooms, watching through the doorway as my mother-in-law introduced a 27-year-old to her friends, with more warmth than she'd ever shown me, and I felt something in my chest go very quiet and very still. Not sad, exactly. Clarifying. I told myself for the 100th time that it wasn't my business to blow this up yet. I needed the debt totals to be final. I needed to understand exactly what Vincent's company actually owed, not just what I'd glimpsed in a drawer 3 years earlier. Every month I waited felt like both cowardice and strategy, and I never fully figured out, even afterward, which one it really was. Maybe both. 6 months ago, Vincent sat me down at our kitchen island, the same island where I'd once found bank notices in a drawer 8 feet away, with the particular posture of a man closing a deal, shoulders back, hands folded, the voice he used with clients he was about to disappoint. "I want a divorce," he said. "I want the house, the cars, the company, everything." I felt strangely calm asking the next question, the way you feel calm right before a procedure you've mentally rehearsed 100 times. "And Tyler? You can keep the kid," he said. "I'm not interested in custody battles. The kid." I've replayed that phrase more times than I can count in the months since, turning it over like a stone, looking for a version of it that hurts less. There isn't one. 8 years of marriage, and our son had become, in a single sentence, a line item Vincent was declining to take. His lawyer, a sharp-suited man named Grant Petrosky, called me 2 days later. A courtesy call, he framed it, though there was nothing courteous about it. "Diana, I want to save you some money," he said. "You really don't need to hire your own attorney for this. It's a straightforward division. And frankly," he added with the kind of condescension that only sounds worse for how casually it's delivered, "you were a part-time bookkeeper. This isn't complicated." I had not been a part-time bookkeeper. I had been a licensed accountant with 6 years at a respected Houston firm, and Vincent knew that, and he'd apparently decided, at some point in the last 8 years, to erase it from the story he told about me, even to his own lawyer. Eleanor called that same week, ostensibly to check on Tyler, though the conversation didn't stay there long. "You should be grateful, Diana," she said, in the tone she reserves for people she considers beneath minor inconveniences. "You had a beautiful life because of my son. Don't be greedy on your way out." I said nothing to either of them. I just smiled, the specific, unbothered smile I'd been practicing in mirrors for 3 years without fully admitting that's what I was doing. And I called Margaret Collins. Margaret Collins-esque has a corner office on the 14th floor of a building on Post Oak Boulevard, 19 years of family law experience, and a reputation, I'd heard it from 2 separate friends before I ever called her, for being the attorney wealthy Houston husbands specifically hope their wives never hire. I laid it all out for her in our first meeting. The debt totals I'd finally reconstructed from 3 years of careful, quiet documentation, the forged signatures on 2 loans, the affair with Brittany Voss, documented in calendar entries, and eventually a handful of receipts I'd found for hotel rooms neither of our combined credit cards had a legitimate reason to have paid for. $4.7 million in total liabilities, hiding behind a 6-bedroom house, 2 European cars, and a company whose flagship building was 2 payments from foreclosure. Margaret listened to the entire thing without interrupting, taking notes on a legal pad in handwriting I could tell, even upside down, was more organized than most people's typed documents. "You could fight for half of the marital estate," she said finally. "With the forged signatures alone, we could go after him hard. Fraud, potentially criminal exposure, a much larger settlement in your favor." "Half of what, though?" I said. "Half of debt?" Margaret actually smiled at that, the first real smile I'd seen from her, small and sharp. "Now you're thinking like the accountant you used to be, instead of the wife he's been telling everyone you are." She explained it to me slowly, the way you'd explain something to someone you suspected already understood, but needed to hear it said out loud to trust it. Under Texas community property law, there's a well-established principle that whoever assumes an asset in a divorce settlement can, if the agreement is drafted to specify it, also assume full personal liability for the debts directly attached to that asset. It's not exotic. It's not a loophole in the shady sense. It's simply precise, deliberate drafting, the kind most people never read closely enough to notice, buried in the specific language of who assumes what. "He's asking for everything," I said slowly, feeling the shape of it forming in my chest for the first time as something other than fear. "The house, the cars, the company, then we give him everything," Margaret said. "Exactly what he's asking for, word for word." We spent the next 4 weeks drafting a 52-page settlement agreement. Page 47 contained a single single dense paragraph, written in the flattest, most unremarkable legal language Margaret could construct. Deliberately unremarkable, she told me, so it reads like every other clause on the page and asks nothing of the eye. It stated, in essence, that the party receiving any marital asset also assumed full personal liability for all debts, liens, and mortgages attached to that asset, effective upon signature. He won't read it, I said, half to myself. Then he won't see it coming, Margaret said. I want to be honest about the 6 weeks before the hearing, because they were not calm, and they were not the triumphant countdown a story like this makes them sound like in hindsight. Quick pause. If you want more stories like this in better quality, my Spotify's linked in the description. Grant Petrosky called Margaret twice, trying to get her to agree to an expedited hearing. Vincent, we later learned, was in a hurry, because one of the lenders had scheduled a foreclosure auction on the flagship building for 6 weeks after our hearing date, and he apparently believed that finalizing the divorce first, with the company technically still his, on paper for a matter of weeks, would somehow shield him from the fallout. It was, Margaret pointed out dryly, precisely the kind of arrogant timing decision that made our page 47 possible in the first place. 3 weeks before the hearing, my own resolve nearly cracked. Tyler had a rough week at school. His teacher, Mrs. Alvarez, called to say he'd cried at recess when another kid asked why his dad never came to pick him up anymore. And I spent that entire night lying awake, wondering if I was about to hand a broken, debt-soaked company to a man who would somehow still land on his feet, while I walked away with nothing but a used minivan and a mortgage-free house that Margaret assured me, over and over, was actually worth less as an asset than it looked once I ran the real numbers on upkeep and property taxes against my post-divorce income. I called Margaret at 11 p.m., something I'd never done before. What if this doesn't work? I said. What if he has his lawyer catch it? What if I've spent 3 years building a trap that catches nothing? Then we fall back to fighting for half of a company drowning in debt he forged your name onto, Margaret said, steady as ever. Diana, I need you to hear me. Even if page 47 fails, you still have documented forgery. You still have a paper trail 3 years deep. You are not walking into that courtroom with nothing. You're walking in with options. Most people going through this have none. That steadied me more than I expected. I hung up, checked on Tyler asleep down the hall, and finally slept. 2 weeks before the hearing, something else happened that nearly derailed everything. I got a call from a woman named Patricia Nunez, a licensed private investigator Margaret had quietly retained months earlier to formally document the affair for the record, in case Vincent tried to contest anything later. Patricia's report included time-stamped photographs of Vincent and Brittany at a hotel on Westheimer, dated 11 months earlier. Evidence solid enough, Margaret said, to eliminate any claim Vincent might later make that the divorce was somehow unfair or that I'd trapped him in bad faith. Patricia's credentials, 14 years as a licensed PI, former Harris County Sheriff's Office, gave the documentation the kind of institutional weight that would matter if this ever escalated past family court. The report arrived 3 days before the hearing. I read it standing in my kitchen, the same kitchen where he'd once told me I could keep the kid, and I felt for the first time in 3 years something close to relief. Not because I enjoyed the confirmation, because the last uncertain piece was finally in place. The morning of the hearing, Vincent arrived at the Harris County Family Courthouse glowing in his best navy suit, his gold Rolex catching the fluorescent light in the hallway, like he'd choreographed the reflection himself. Brittany sat in the front row of the gallery in a red dress, phone angled discreetly in her lap, filming for what I later learned were her 23,000 followers. Eleanor sat beside her in Chanel, smug in a way that had once made me feel small, and now, oddly, made me feel almost sorry for her, for what she didn't yet know was coming. Judge Marion Whitfield, presiding, asked the standard procedural question before finalizing any settlement of this size. Did either party wish to request an independent financial review of the agreement before signing? Vincent actually laughed, out loud, in a Texas family courtroom, in front of a judge who'd clearly heard every kind of overconfidence in 19 years on the bench. I built this company, he said. I don't need some accountant telling me what I already know. I watched Margaret's face stay perfectly, professionally neutral. I kept mine the same way. Vincent waived his right to review. He signed page 49. He signed page 52. He slid the full 52-page document across the table toward Grant Petrosky and me, with the flat, satisfied smile of a man who believes he has just won something. Done, he announced, loud enough for the gallery to hear, glancing back toward Brittany like he wanted her to see it too. Grant Petrosky, to his credit, was still flipping pages, thoroughness or maybe just habit, and I watched his eyes catch on something midway through the stack. His hand shot out toward Vincent's sleeve. Wait, what? Vincent said, already halfway into a laugh. It's done. She signed. I signed. Page 47, Grant said, and his voice had changed entirely. Flat, careful, the voice of a man realizing in real time exactly how badly he'd failed at his one job, the liability clause. Vincent's smile didn't fall so much as freeze in place, like a photograph of a smile rather than the thing itself. He grabbed the document back and read it himself, lips moving slightly over the words the way people do when they're reading something they desperately need to be wrong. The party receiving marital assets hereby assumes full personal liability for all debts, liens, and mortgages attached to said assets. His face drained of color so completely, so visibly, that Judge Whitfield actually paused before continuing, watching him the way you'd watch someone realize, mid-sentence, that the floor beneath them wasn't there anymore. This says I'm responsible for the debts, he said, quiet at first, then louder. All of them? All 4.7 million, Margaret said, calm as still water. As of your signature 30 seconds ago. Brittany's voice cracked from the gallery, sharp enough to carry across the whole room. 4 million? What? Vincent shot up out of his chair so fast it screeched backward across the floor and nearly nearly toppled. "This is fraud! She tricked me!" Judge Whitfield removed her glasses slowly and looked at him with the specific, weary patience of someone who has watched this exact scene play out, in one form or another, more times than she'd probably like to count. "Mr. Saunders, your wife's attorney disclosed the full agreement in writing, and you personally waived your right to independent financial review. On the record, less than 5 minutes ago. This court cannot protect you from your own confidence." Vincent turned to me. Whatever composure the navy suit and the Rolex had been holding together completely came apart. "You knew," he said, his voice shaking now, all the polish gone out of it. "You knew this whole time." I thought about the drawer. The forged signature with the wrong hitch in the D. 3 years of quiet, exhausting patience. Tyler at the window with a dinosaur book, waiting for headlights that didn't stop. "I didn't trick you, Vincent," I said. "I just gave you exactly what you asked for." Here's what happened next, in the specific, unglamorous language of consequences, because real justice rarely announces itself with music. Within 72 hours, the lender holding the note on the flagship office building moved forward with the foreclosure auction that had already been scheduled, now against a property Vincent alone was liable for, in full, by his own signature. 2 additional creditors, once they learned through court filings that the debts had been consolidated under Vincent's sole personal liability, accelerated their own collection actions. By the following month, Saunders Premier Realty had filed for Chapter 7 bankruptcy, a fact that made the Houston Business Journal's real estate section in a short item that Margaret forwarded to me without comment, though I could practically feel her satisfaction through the email. Separately. And this part I only learned because Detective Aaron Mbeki of the Harris County Financial Crimes Unit, 14 years with the department, contacted Margaret's office directly. The forged loan documents I'd photographed 3 years earlier became the basis of a formal fraud investigation once Margaret, at my direction, finally reported them. Timed deliberately to land after the settlement was finalized and unchallengeable. Detective Mbeki interviewed me twice, cross-referencing my original 2023 phone photographs, timestamps intact, against the original loan files subpoenaed from both lenders. "The metadata alone corroborates your timeline in a way that would hold up in front of any jury," he told me in our second interview, a sentence that meant more to me than I expected. 3 years after I'd first sat on that office floor with my hands shaking, Vincent was ultimately charged with 2 counts of forgery of a financial instrument. He accepted a plea agreement rather than face trial, probation, restitution to the 2 lenders, and a permanent flag on his real estate license that effectively ended any future in the industry he'd built his entire identity around. Brittany, according to 2 mutual acquaintances who felt compelled to update me whether I asked or not, left within the month once the bankruptcy filing became public. Eleanor stopped calling entirely. I haven't spoken to her since the hearing, and I've made a kind of peace with the particular silence that leaves behind. People ask me sometimes what I actually walked away with, since I'd handed Vincent the house, the cars, and the company, everything he'd asked for, in his own words, at our kitchen island 6 months before that hearing. I kept my son. I kept my name, unforged, finally safe on every document that mattered. I kept a modest condo I bought with the small cash settlement Margaret negotiated separately, outside the asset and liability trap, specifically earmarked for Tyler's and my transition. And, this part surprised me most, I kept my old profession. Whitmore & Associates, the firm I'd left 9 years earlier, brought me back on part-time within 2 months of the hearing becoming public knowledge in certain Houston circles. Once it became clear exactly whose numbers I'd been quietly running circles around for 3 years. I am once again an accountant. Full circle, in the plainest possible sense. Tyler is 6 now. He reads the dinosaur book himself these days, out loud, at the kitchen table in our condo, sounding out the longer words with the kind of concentration that makes my chest ache in the good way instead of the old way. He doesn't ask about his father much anymore. When he does, I tell him the truth, sized to fit a 6-year-old, that his dad made some very big mistakes, and that none of them were Tyler's fault, not even a little. I ran into Grant Petrosky once, at a legal conference Margaret dragged me to as her guest, of all places. He was polite, professional, carefully neutral, the way lawyers get when they've been on the losing end of something they still can't quite explain to themselves. He didn't bring up the case, neither did I. Margaret and I still have coffee every few months. Last time, she raised her cup and said, half joking, to page 47. I raised mine back. To reading the whole document, I said, before you sign it. She laughed, the same sharp, satisfied laugh from her office the day I first told her I wanted to give Vincent everything he asked for. He wanted the house, the cars, the company, everything. I gave him exactly that. He just never thought to ask what came attached.